Hey everyone, welcome back to The Collector's Compass, the official podcast of Collectors MD, where we explore the intersection of collecting, mental wellness, and responsible engagement in the modern hobby. I'm your host, Alyx Efron, founder of Collectors MD, and today, this is a big one. We're joined by someone whose voice reaches hundreds of thousands of collectors, someone who sits at the center of every major hobby conversation, whether he asks for it or not. Geoff Wilson, the founder of Sports Card Investor, Market Movers, and CardsHQ. Now, Geoff and I have had several public and private conversations already about reform, responsibility, and the need for transparency in the breaking space. And with the launch of the Rip Responsibly movement, a movement designed to protect collectors, increase awareness, and push for better guardrails across the entire hobby ecosystem, this episode couldn't be more timely. Rip Responsibly isn't about shaming breaking. It's not about being anti-hobby. It's about addressing harmful mechanics, high-pressure tactics, misinformation, and the pressure-filled environments that lead collectors, especially vulnerable ones, into financial and emotional harm. Geoff is here because he understands the influence he carries. He understands the responsibility that comes with building platforms at scale. And he's willing to have the hard conversations publicly, which is rare and something I respect deeply. Geoff, welcome to the Collector's Compass. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alyx. Appreciate it. Appreciate being here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise. So for listeners who may not know the full story, what made you want to join this conversation around responsibility and reform in the hobby?
You know, the hobby is obviously growing tremendously and a lot of new people are coming in. And I think first and foremost, we want people to have a good experience. I mean, we want people to come in and have a lasting experience in the hobby. And I think that there's a lot going on in the hobby for new people, right? And it's a lot to learn and it's a lot to take in, and there's a lot of different facets to it. And it is possible to come in for sure and to have bad experiences off the bat with a hobby. If it's entering into a break and, ending up with, nothing and feel like you've spent a lot of money and you didn't get a lot in return, that can happen. That can be a bad initial experience. If it's going to a card show and not knowing what something's worth and overpaying for, cards and then realizing later you paid way too much money, or if it's investing, in a rookie quarterback who ends up not panning out and, the cards that you bought, end up down 60%. All of these are very real world scenarios, which happen every day to collectors in the hobby. And it's unavoidable that those things are going to continue to happen. It's part of the hobby. It even experienced collectors, those things often happen in them all the time. I mean, I enjoy breaking. I enjoy buying into breaks, and I buy into breaks as a customer sometimes. And you'll buy into breaks, you'll open boxes, you won't end up with a whole lot, right? But as an experienced collector, I know that that's entertainment, and I know that that's not, I'm not going all in on that as my only form of, enjoying the hobby. I'll speculate on buying cards of rookie quarterbacks. This year was Michael Penix. Didn't work out so well. Falcons are bad. Michael Penix is injured and out for the season. Those cards are down in value. Happened to me a bunch of times before. I continue to do it.
Will Greer, right? That
Will
was your
Greer,
guy a couple of years ago.
Desmond Ridder for the Falcons a few years ago. Speculating and taking a chance on young players. But here's the difference. I recognize and understand it's a big risk. And I'm willing to take the risk. And I'm willing to do it with money that I know I may lose. And at the end of the day, if I lose that money, it stings to lose the money. I don't want to lose the money, but I recognized from the beginning that was a possibility of occurring, right? And so there's that, kind of danger for new collectors, fraught in a bunch of different places in the hobby. So I think building awareness and then obviously giving them support resources if they go overboard are positive things. And so you're supplying part of that for the ecosystem. And so I thought that when I learned about it, I thought it was, interesting and potentially something we wanted to support.
Yeah, absolutely, Geoff. Thank you so much for going into detail there. And you brought up so many great points. And, I think the biggest thing there is the fact that there are so many collectors that join our hobby and just don't understand the associated risks and the nuances with investing in young players, volatile. No, you don't know if they're going to pan out. You don't know if somebody's going to get injured. You don't know if a player is going to end up in a scandal. There's so many variables to account for when you're investing in something like an athlete. It's not the same thing as investing in stocks or, anything else for that matter. And so what we're doing here at Collectors MD is all about spreading positive awareness, reinforcing a lot of the education and knowledge that somebody like yourself already knows, and allowing for collectors, especially those that are young, uneducated, vulnerable, to have a space to come to if or when they start to feel that sense of burnout. So let's start at the foundation, the hashtag movement. So we're rolling out a hashtag Rip Responsibly campaign with CardsHQ this month, which I'm really excited about. And so there's been excitement, there's been confusion, there's been pushback in the hobby, and even fear about what this could potentially mean for collectors. So from your perspective, Geoff, why does this movement matter?
I think for me, it is just giving people who might get a little bit overboard with it the opportunity to get some support, to take a pause, and to be able to talk to people who have maybe had overboard experiences with it before. That's what it means to me, right? It doesn't change the idea that, we're still going to do breaking. Obviously, breaking is a big part of our business at CardsHQ. We're going to continue to do breaking. I think that breaking is a fun way to experience the hobby. I think it's entertaining. But I also think, and I've said this a whole bunch of times on all of my different shows, I think people need to realize and understand that breaking is entertainment. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be your entertainment budget. It's not a form of breaking is not a form of investing. And it's not also necessarily the best form of collecting, because, oftentimes in a break, you end up with a bunch of random cards and sometimes random teams, and it's not necessarily pure to what you're wanting to collect. And so it is, if you want to invest in cards, I wouldn't be buying into breaks. I would be buying singles. If you want to collect cards, breaking can be leveraged for that, but not always, depending on, the format and kind of, what your collecting strategy is. There may be more specific ways to do that, such as, buying singles or buying a specific box or something of that nature. If you want entertainment and you want community and you want excitement, then breaking can provide all of that in the sports card world, right? And so I think breaking does serve an important purpose in the ecosystem. I think that breaking also, by the way, is how a lot of product gets opened, and therefore how a lot of cards end up on the secondary market. So for people who purely want to buy singles and collect that way, they need breaking to take place to get all those cards onto the secondary market. So
Yeah.
I think it serves a purpose, but I also think that for some people, they can get caught up in the energy and the excitement and the allure of it. And I think that it can, when you're on, some of these apps and you're swiping and, that kind of thing, like you can sometimes probably get caught, get a little too caught up in the moment. And I think, that affects different people in different ways, right? Like I don't think that I am one that really kind of goes overboard with stuff and gets caught up in the moment. Like I tend to be a little bit more measured, about my purchases and entering into breaks and everything like that. But everybody's a little bit of a different personality type. And I think some personalities are maybe more subjected to getting, really getting into it. And what you don't want to see is you don't want to see somebody who's newer, not experienced, puts in a credit card, gets caught up in the excitement and goes beyond what their financial means are for entertainment spending. That's where it's a problem. And so to me, Rip Responsibly is like, hey, don't do that. Like, let's recognize that this is fun and this is entertaining, but you got to be responsible about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you brought up a really good point in that a lot of the cards on the secondary market are because of breaking and break culture. And the reason, one of the many reasons why breaking exists is because a lot of these hobby boxes aren't accessible to the average consumer, the average collector anymore. And so breaking gives people an opportunity to join in on something that they want to be a part of at a more realistic and affordable cost. And so by nature, I think the hobby has evolved in this direction organically because of the inflation, the uptick in prices of a lot of boxes. And so Collectors MD from the get-go isn't anti-breaking or anti-hobby. It's not even close to that. We love this hobby. We're in it every day. We want it to grow, evolve, and stay fun. What we don't want to see are the parts of the hobby that, take advantage of people, the pressure, the misinformation, the engineered urgency, the stuff that turns excitement into high stakes pressure and stress. So, like you said, breaking can be fun. Absolutely. It can be entertaining. It can be communal. It can be exciting. We just want it to also be transparent, safe, and responsibly designed. And so we're not here to shut anything down. We're not here to be watchdogs or to call people out or call platforms out. We're here to protect the hobby that we love and the people in it. So with that, a big thing people misunderstand is that Rip Responsibly isn't anti-breaking. It's pro-transparency, pro-sustainability, and pro-protection for collectors who are most vulnerable. So in your eyes, Geoff, where does the current breaking ecosystem maybe cross the line a little bit from entertainment into potential harm?
Well, I mean, one area in particular that I surfaced as an issue, and we took steps to try to solve, at CardsHQ, was repacks.
Hmm.
I think the breaking industry has veered heavily in the direction of repacks over the last couple of years, and what I saw was that there were a lot of repack products that were being, sold by breakers and opened up on, live streams that were not necessarily fully transparent and honest.
Right.
And I felt like first and foremost, there should be transparency over what somebody's buying into. And I thought that repacks were the least transparent aspect of the breaking hobby in many cases. When we came out with our own repack product at CardsHQ, Graded Grails, I said, hey, if we're going to do a repack, I want to do it differently. I want to do a repack that I think is fair, transparent, and honest, and that hopefully sets the standard to put pressure, frankly, on other repack, providers that are not doing their repacks fair, transparently, and honestly. And so we rolled out with Graded Grails. We obviously had PSA. We partnered with PSA to have PSA certify the product. PSA actually boxes it for us. So what happens is, we ship all of the cards for the product to PSA, and we say, hey, here's the checklist. They have all of the boxes, and PSA actually verifies that they have all of the cards according to the checklist. And then they put them in the boxes randomly, and
Right.
then they seal all the boxes and put them in cases and ship them back to us. And so that way, when we're opening them and breaking them, there's no funny business. There's no ability
Right.
for us to manipulate the game. And what we're doing is fully transparent. The full checklist is on our website, and we're also letting people know exactly what cards are still there on the checklist. So it's, if the, major big chase card was pulled, we tell people during the break that one is no longer available. So people know more so what they're buying into. And so to me, that's kind of part of, being a responsible breaker is you've got to be, transparent with your customers with the products that you're breaking.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and it's a very valid point. And transparency and odds when it comes to something like a repack mean everything, right? Repacks, they sound fun. something like a mystery box or a chance at a big hit. But the issue starts with how little transparency is. Most collectors have no idea what the real odds are, how many chase cards are, are left or actually exist, or whether the product is even fairly priced or dispersed compared to what's inside. And so the seller with repacks, the seller controls everything, right? The checklist, the hit distribution, the valuation, the environment, and the story they tell around it and how they market it. And so, when the house builds the product, the house almost always wins. And so that doesn't mean every repack is malicious or a scam. And it just means that we need to adjust things. We need to improve the way things are created. And so I think you took a really great approach. And I love everything that you're doing with PSA and just providing more transparency around how you're doing, or how you're presenting this product to consumers. And I really hope that in due time, other breakers, other platforms, other folks start to follow suit.
And we saw Whatnot last month start to roll out with requirements on repacks for their breakers. So they, I think had similar concerns that I did around maybe some of these repack products that are being sold on their platform are not, fully transparent or fully honest or whatever it may be. And so they put rules in place. And one of those big things they created was like, there has to be a separation between the creation of the repack and the breaker themselves. Those have to be separated out, right? And then the person who's creating the repack, there are standards now on the randomization, the checklist, all that kind of stuff. And so I was very pleased to see Whatnot pick that up, and I think that's a step in the right direction. And hopefully all platforms will follow suit, and hopefully that's something that's really, kind of the standard going forward.
Yeah, it's all about setting a standard and creating those regulations, those rules and requirements that breakers have to follow. Otherwise, it just turns into the Wild West. Anybody can do anything and market any product however they want. And so that was announced by Whatnot last month, correct? It was in November or maybe October.
It was, I think, announced in October, going into effective early November. And I think they're kind of phasing in all the rules. I think they're I don't know if 100% of the breakers are following 100% of the rules yet. But I know Whatnot is phasing in kind of the enforcement of that.
Yeah. Actions speak louder than words. So, when we see an announcement like that, it's really important that these platforms and individuals who are talking about reform, talking about healthier and more sustainable ways to proceed with the hobby and how we market to consumers, we want to make sure that, or we want to see those platforms actually acting on what they're bringing to the table or what they're presenting to make themselves look like, we're the good guys. We're trying to look out for you. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And like you said, I hope to see more breakers start to adapt to these new rules and regulations that are in place. But it's beyond just the repacks. Let's name it plainly. There's more than just the repacks that are involved with some issues at play here. So there's the sense of urgency, the constant pushing of that FOMO. You see breakers do it all the time, right? You have to get in this break. This is a can't miss, value break that if you don't get in, you're missing out. You're missing out on an opportunity of a lifetime, right? Then there's the countdown timers. There's the spinning wheels. It's all entertainment driven pressure. And so these are not like neutral tools. They're psychological levers in a lot of ways. So what are the risks that collectors might not fully understand?
Yeah, I mean, that stuff can certainly draw people in, right? You see that type of stuff used in a lot of different aspects of life, right? I mean, it's no different than walking into a car dealership and getting, the salesman, the sale's only on today. The sale ends at midnight. We got to get you in this car right now, type thing, or sales that end at certain times, or in many ways it's like, going to Dave and Buster's and playing the video games with all the, you know, the tickets and I want to go to the prize, you know, to go to the prize room and, you know, get the giant stuffed animal or whatever it is. Like, you know, certainly all that stuff is, you're right, it's psychologically designed to both entertain and make it fun and exciting, but also kind of get people to take action and, you know, to get into it. And obviously in this case, to spend money in breaks. So, you know, my personal viewpoint is there's nothing inherently wrong with a lot of that, but there needs to be, like, obviously people going into it need to understand that it is what it is, and it is a form of entertainment. I do think breakers have the responsibility of certainly not like overselling, and not like, from a sales perspective, not trying to push people into things very hard. Like, we have the approach at CardsHQ. We've told like all of our team, like, no high pressure sales, zero, not acceptable. Like, in fact, we do the complete opposite. Our breakers, if you watch our breaks, they'll say, hey, if you just want to hang out with us in the room, hang out. No pressure ever to buy in. Hang out in the chat. We appreciate having everybody here. We're never going to call anybody out and say, hey, why don't you buy in? Or why are you just hanging out here, you know, doing the giveaways and not like actually buying in, and we're never going to say like, hey guys, you got to, like, this is the deal of a lifetime, you got to get in on this. Or, no, we don't do that. That's our company policy. No high pressure, you know, sales tactics. And we're very community driven. So we're very open to whoever wants to just come and hang out, and they're not required to buy anything. Our retail store, we do trade nights. People can come in, they can set up at trade nights. We never put any pressure on anybody. Like, you can come for free. You don't have to buy anything. You can just come hang out and do trades. And that's perfectly fine, because we want to support the community. And it's the same with our breaks. So I think breakers, you know, taking a low pressure approach is what should be the standard, and not like a bunch of, you know, screaming and yelling for people to, like, you know, you got to get in on this and that type of thing. But to a degree, I think some of that is inevitable, because it is, you know, in all aspects of life, you see those types of psychological drivers, you know, kind of coming into play. So then the other element of that is, like, you know, telling people like, hey, it's okay to take a break. And if you need support for this, if this is becoming like, if you get sucked into this, you know, harder than you should have been, then, you know, how do we safely get you back out of that and get you, you know, surrounded by people who can support?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly where Collectors MD enters the conversation. And I'm glad you brought up the car salesman pitch, because that's sort of a great comparison to how a lot of these breakers operate. And I'm really glad to hear that you've implemented that as a standard, as a company policy, that your breakers can't operate with this, you know, this sense of being overly pushy and just driving urgency and FOMO. And it's not a healthy way to operate. It's not fair to the consumer. It's not fair to your customer. And so, you know, I also am glad that you brought up that it exists in other aspects of life, because Collectors MD isn't just about the sports cars. It's about any corner of the collectible world, really any vertical where people feel pressure to spend. That means, you know, of course, the breaks and the singles and the grading, the repacks, the auctions, all of it. But it also stretches into other verticals: the sneakers, the comics, the gaming, the art, the memorabilia, the toys, the Funko Pops, the Labubus, you know, like TCG, obviously, NFTs, gaming, even like online marketplace drops. You see it on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, like all of these sales that are just being forced down consumers' throats, like driving that sense of urgency, right? Like the empty cart messages where, you know, you left something behind, come, like, you have 10 minutes to make this purchase and get 20% off. We see it across every single industry. And so anywhere excitement, urgency, and money intersect, people can get pulled into these deep and unplanned purchases. And so because compulsion doesn't care if you're ripping a box or chasing a grail pair of sneakers or bidding on a comic or refreshing a limited drop. It's the feeling that matters, not the item, right? So Collectors MD exists to help people navigate every one of those touch points with more clarity, intention, and support.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is nothing specific to cards, right? I mean, cards maybe is the focus here a little bit more because there is, breaking is obviously very, very prevalent with cards. And there's always been more of a chance element in cards because, I mean, from the very beginning, there's been packs, right? And so, this simple process of ripping open a pack of cards and not knowing exactly what's inside and hoping you find the big rookie or whoever it is you're looking for, there's a chance element that has existed in cards going back all the way to the 1950s. I mean, packs of 1952 tops, they came in packs and you had chance element of like, am I going to get the Mickey Mantle or not? Right. So, I mean, this has existed for, over 70 years in cards. So cards has a little longer of a history of the chance element than other industries have, other forms of collectibles have. So it's probably a little more prevalent in cards, but you're right. It exists in a lot of other places in life as well.
Yeah. And it's the technology, the combination of technology and social media that has really driven a lot of these industries in the direction of, high velocity, high speed, high pressure environments where you just feel like you're getting sucked in and you don't have a choice but to spend. Right.
Yep.
So I want to pivot here and talk a little bit about the influence that you have. So you've built some of the biggest platforms in the hobby, and with that comes massive influence, which can create ripple effects, intended or not. So how do you think about the responsibility that's tied to that influence?
Yeah, so we recognize a lot of people find sports card investor first when they are newer collectors. Like we are an entry point where a lot of people discover our content because we're very prevalent. If you go into YouTube and you type in sports cards, we're probably coming up one, or we're certainly coming up, towards the top, right? So we try to layer in educational content into what we're doing often that is oriented towards new collectors. We've got one of our most popular videos is our sports card collecting and investing 101. We actually update that video every couple of years and put a new version of it out. And if you go watch that video, we give kind of an overview of the entire landscape. We're very, very clear in that video. We talk at length about how, for example, we talk about breaking in that video, and we're very clear. Breaking is entertainment, and you can lose a lot. And opening up boxes, ripping boxes is also a form of entertainment. If you're looking to build a collection, you're better off buying singles. If you're looking to invest, you're better off buying singles. But opening up boxes and breaking both have an important role in the ecosystem, and they can be a lot of fun. Just balance yourself out, right?
Right.
And I repeat that messaging in a lot of the programming that we do. One thing that I've said in a number of shows recently is, for people who love to rip boxes or love to buy into breaks, which I do as well, I would challenge them that every dollar you spend ripping open a box or buying into a break, to also spend $1 buying a single of a established veteran or Hall of Famer, because that's going to be a much, more sustainable spending of that dollar from a long-term standpoint, right? I think if people kind of think about almost ratioing their money a little bit within what they're willing to spend in the collectibles category, if we can get people balancing that out, so they're not just 100% breaks, or they're not just 100% ripping boxes, but they're also, buying singles, chances are, 30 years from now, if they did buy some high quality singles and held on to them, those are going to be the things that 30 years from now, they're going to be really happy that they did that. They're probably not going to remember the breaks that they bought into and what came of that as much, but they hopefully will say, oh gosh, I sure am glad that I, put some dollars aside and bought that Michael Jordan card, or bought that, Tom Brady card or, whatever it may be, and held on to that for 30 years.
Right.
And so I think just a balanced approach is healthy. So that's something that we certainly encourage throughout all of our content. And we want to be transparent and truthful with people with the risks as well, right? Like, so when we do our top 5 cards going up of the week, we do that video every Tuesday. We feature in every single one of those videos, we feature a cold card of the week before we get into the hot cards. Right. And the reason why, and I say it in every single video, I say, I'm going to show you the cold card of the week. And the cold card of the week is a reminder that oftentimes the hot cards featured in this video can quickly turn cold. So please invest carefully. And then we tell them the story of some card that's down 30 or 40 or 50% over the last month because the player got injured or the player, the team got bad or whatever happened. Right. So that is, we do that every single week in that video. So I think it's things like that, which are important to, to help educate and also, show what the risks are and hopefully help new collectors navigate the hobby in a healthy way.
Yeah, that ties directly back to the transparency, but it also fits into our lane of intentional collecting, which is what we are advocating for. Those collectors that are looking for more of a harm reduction approach, and they still want to be involved in the hobby, but do so in a more mindful and responsible way. Intentional collecting, is sort of the opposite of chasing everything that moves, right? It just means slowing down, getting clear on what you actually enjoy, and building your collection with purpose, not pressure. So it's asking yourself things like, why do I want this? Does it fit my goals or just my FOMO? Will I still care about it next week, right? Intentional collecting puts meaning over hype, joy over impulse, and long-term satisfaction over short-term dopamine. So it's about collecting what connects with you, not what the market or the algorithm or the crowd is telling you to or screaming at you to. So when you collect intentionally, you end up spending less, you enjoy more, and you end up with a collection that actually feels like a reflection of you and your story. And we're seeing more and more of that in our community as we continue to grow and just bring more folks in. We're divided into 2 separate lanes. Collectors or intentional collecting is the primary lane because that's where we're seeing the majority of folks coming in. And then, of course, there's the abstinence folks that just can't have a healthy relationship with collecting anymore. And they're either taking a break temporarily or permanently from the hobby. I also want to talk about or unpack a little bit more how some of these platforms and sellers, they're really, incentivized in a lot of ways to encourage a lot of the compulsive behavior we're talking about, right? Because that's what drives volume and that's what drives revenue. It's a part of their business model. Like these breakers that are screaming at the chat to get involved, they're really just doing their job. They're trying to drive revenue for the company they represent. So what do you think needs to change in order for that ecosystem to become healthier and I guess more fair for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fine line right there. I mean, obviously, as the owner of a breaking company, I look at the revenue reports all the time, and we're always talking about, hey, how do we grow? How do we gain more revenue? How do we grow? And then there's that fine line between how do you keep things moving and keep growing and everything like that, but how do you do it in a way that is, friendly and responsible to the end consumer? I'll tell you, like in terms of like getting into specific like mechanics around filling a break or, something of that nature, like we've experimented with all kinds of different, how do we fill a break, sudden death auctions, regular auctions, short time periods, long time periods, all that kind of thing. The one that we have done before, and I've done it before, I've tried it before, I've been on streams where we've done it before, but I do feel like gets, not like, I feel like it does lead to like, swiping too quickly and overpaying is when you get into a really low second like sudden death auction.
death
Like I'm
auction.
not a big fan of like the 3-second and 5-second sudden death auctions. And we've played with those before. We've had fun with those before on some of our streams. But when you really think about that from like kind of the end consumers, vantage point, like that's probably not a great consumer experience to like be quickly swiping and not even quite knowing what you're getting into, right?
Yeah.
I don't have an issue with sudden death auctions in general. There's a lot of platforms that use sudden death auctions. eBay is all about sudden death auctions. I mean, if you're bidding on eBay, your bid ends, the auction's going to end at like 10:20 p.m. and it's essentially a sudden death auction. I think the key to running a responsible sudden death auction is just having enough time for the person to be able to contemplate what the maximum they're willing to go up to is. And then they can enter, by the way, that maximum bid. Like, we do a lot of our breaking on Whatnot, and Whatnot allows users to put in a max do not exceed bid,
Right.
and it will continue to bid up to that max bid. So like in a sudden death auction format, if you've got 15 seconds or 30 seconds to, for a spot to fill, I don't think sudden death is necessarily a problem then, because you give people enough time to, say, okay, I'm going to put it in a max bid. Here's the maximum I'm willing to pay. So I'm going to put in a max bid of $80 for this spot, put in an $80 bid. And if it falls underneath that, I get it. If it goes over that, I don't get it. And it is what it is. And I feel like that's kind of a responsible way of doing it. Having that max bid function, I feel like adds some responsibility. If you're doing a 3-second sudden death auction, then it just, all that kind of goes out of the window a little bit. And it's just like, oh, how quickly did I swipe? And what did I end up getting it for? I don't really know, so that's probably not the best format. And once again, we're guilty of having done that before. I've been on shows where we've done that before, but we've in general have moved away from that. And we do sudden death, but we tend to do a little bit of a longer time period to give people the opportunity to set a maximum bid, think about it, set a maximum bid, and then just kind of let that ride out and see who ended up bidding the most.
Yeah. We talk about the sudden death bids quite often because they are one of the most dangerous. It's such a great point, especially when it's like 15 seconds or less, where folks just, they feel that sense of urgency. They feel that sense of FOMO. They hear the breaker saying, this is a steal. They see moderators in the chat saying like, this is the comp. And suddenly they're just subconsciously swiping, with their thumb on the Whatnot app and making uninformed purchasing decisions. And they just keep going and going. And we've seen it time and time again where a breaker will just come up with a, pie in the sky number to assign a card and say, this slab, this PSA 10 did $2,000, go, right? And people are like, oh, they're scrambling and they're trying to bid. And suddenly the card goes for $1,000 and the breaker's like, you got to steal. And then you look at the comp after the fact and you see that the card goes for $500 and you're like, what did I just get sucked into? And I'm not saying that all breakers do this. It doesn't happen across the board, but there are some folks that take advantage of the system. And so, beyond just that, one thing that I say repeatedly is you can't expect individual collectors to protect themselves in systems designed to override their logic. And that is a perfect example of where that could happen. So what other guardrails do you think should or could exist across these platforms that currently don't?
That's a good question. I mean, and look, it is a fine line. Like I tend to veer more like my personal view on a lot of this is I tend to veer more towards personal responsibility. Like I do think that people who get caught up in a lot of this, like, they do need to look upon themselves. So I think personal responsibility, but I do think there need to be mechanisms for people to get help who need help. I think they need to be aware of it. Right. But that said, there are between, the platform or the breaker, going too far. And, some of the examples you just said, I think are probably going too far on the platform or the breaker's behalf. I mean, I know something you've mentioned before, Alyx, was like, is there a way that you could hit a timeout button, within like one of these apps? And it like, if you just like need kind of a cool down period, if you just bought into a break and you are like, man, I, overextended myself a little bit on that, or I I got a real bad feeling in my stomach because I bought into a break and ended up with no cards. And, and I just like, probably shouldn't have done that. And if you just kind of almost need to put yourself like in timeout, for the day or whatever, and just be like, man, maybe I'll sit here and continue to watch this break, but I just gotta, I just shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a mechanism for doing that to, just to kind of help almost protect yourself in some manner.
Right.
Maybe there's, I don't know if there's any type of way to identify customers who might be getting themselves into trouble. I don't know that there is, because the challenge with that is like, I was breaking last night on our CardsHQ Breaks channel myself. And it's like, we had some folks in the room who were spending a lot of money. Like we had a handful of customers who were buying multiple spots and multiple breaks and were spending a lot of money. I have no idea if those individuals are wealthy and have this type of income to spend freely and are really enjoying the entertainment, and it's completely fine for them to be doing that, or if they're, really chasing and are, overselling them or overextending themselves. Right. And really do kind of like need to take it down a notch and take a time out. Like, I don't have any way of telling that as a breaker, unless the person's like ranting in the chat or something like that. But normally that's not the case.
Right.
I don't know if the platform has any way of really telling that. I don't know how they would really be able to detect that. So, I mean, it would be lovely if the platforms, could themselves like kind of say, hey, maybe you're going a little too far, but I don't know how they decide that. I'm not sure it's possible, but I do think people could at least kind of self-select into a timeout, and maybe that's a good like stepping forward in that regard.
Yeah. The timeouts, the cool off periods, those are important.
Mm-hmm.
What you're suggesting makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure there are algorithms or AI tools or software that can sort of detect if somebody is maybe going beyond their means. But there's a fine line there, because you don't want to, be the judge of somebody's, situation or personal finances and say, we're cutting you off because X, Y, and Z, because if this algorithm picked up this or that, the other. So I think what's more important is layering in those subtle messages to remind folks, like, if you're on a gambling app like a DraftKings or a FanDuel, you'll get that alert like you've been using the app for like an hour, right? It sends periodic reminders so that you can keep track of and get, sort of that moment to take a step back, come back down to earth, be like, all right, I got to cool off now. Then there's other things. There's like, you could set deposit limits where, you only allow yourself to spend X amount of money on a given day or a given week or a given month, right? Like that would be an incredible feature that they can very easily bake into a lot of these platforms. So there's a lot to it. And I'm very hopeful that, the powers that be start recognizing that, some folks are having a hard time with this, and we do need to protect them to some extent. And while it may jeopardize some short-term revenue, it'll allow folks to stay in the hobby and, have a more sustainable experience. So there's not this massive churn where somebody gets skunked in a break and it's like, I'm done. I'm walking away. I'm not doing this ever again. We see somebody else come in, or, two people replace the person that left. We want people to stay in the hobby because they love it, because they're passionate about it. We don't want to scare them away and steer them away from, this space, this hobby, this pastime that's been around for hundreds of years, just because these mechanics are designed to, work against them in a lot of ways. So from an accountability standpoint, how do we create a culture where sellers actually take some of the responsibility for the emotional and financial impact they might have on their audience? I mean, you brought up some really great examples that you're already implementing at CardsHQ, but beyond that, like, what else can we do?
I mean, hopefully over time, more people will agree with what you just said, right? Like we want our customers at CardsHQ to have a positive experience. And that doesn't mean that every customer is going to always be thrilled with a break that they bought into where they didn't get any cards, or a box that they bought in our retail store where they ripped and it was kind of a dud box. And that is part of the experience if you're going to go into that aspect of the card hobby. But overall, we do want people to feel like they were treated fairly, and that we strived to provide a good experience for them, even though we can't always, guarantee the outcome of every product. Right. And so I think there are a lot of people in the hobby that think and operate that way. I think that you are obviously bringing a voice to this. There's not really been any type of central voice or organization that has been pushing for any of that. Like you're definitely a trailblazer in that regard of saying like, hey guys, this is important. And I think a lot of people think this way, but there's nobody really bringing that message together and bringing it out. And so, hopefully over time, more and more dealers and card shop owners and breakers and all that type of thing will also let their own voices be heard and align with organizations such as yours. It would be great if over time the platforms and the manufacturers, took some steps in this direction as well. And I think we have to be very reasonable with what we expect them to do, because they're obviously in the business of either providing an exciting platform and driving revenue and returns for their shareholders, or providing, fun products to rip and driving revenue and returns for their shareholders. But I think that everybody from a reasonable perspective could hopefully agree that there are some incremental things that could be done to help ensure that the collector experience is as healthy as it possibly can be overall. And I think that, hopefully like at CardsHQ, by us now having this conversation about, hey, how we're implementing some of this, and we're going to be rolling out later this month with some messaging that will be rolled periodically during our breaks, where it will, we're going to have some messaging saying like, hey, we want you to rip responsibly. Right. And if you feel like, it's getting a little bit overwhelming and you might need to take a time out, take a pause, and there are support resources available for you through Collectors MD. So that's the message that we're going to be putting into our breaks a few times, per evening on our streams. That message will go on probably every couple of hours, so that people watching or participating, will hear the message, and hopefully other breakers will see us doing that, and maybe they'll follow suit, or they'll hear you talking on podcasts like these, and it will kind of strike them as like, yeah, you know what, that's just the right thing to do. Like, and once again, I think the real important thing is, as you said right from the beginning, it doesn't mean that breaking is bad. It doesn't mean that breakers need to stop breaking. It doesn't mean that they even need to change most of what they're doing. But it is just, let's be a little more mindful about the end consumer, and let's recognize that not every single person who's buying into the breaks is maybe in the most healthy headspace when they're doing it. So let's provide some mechanism for the people who may not be, to be able to, get some support if that's what they need.
Yeah, great answer, Geoff. And that's what the Rip Responsibly campaign is all about, right? It's a movement built to make the hobby safer, smarter, and more transparent without taking the fun away of anything. It's not anti-breaking. It's not anti-hobby. It's just about awareness, protection, and better guardrails, right? Yep. Breaking today, it's fast, it's loud, it's emotional, and it's engineered to keep people spending. And so a lot of collectors just don't even realize how much pressure, urgency, and psychology is built into the overall experience. So Rip Responsibly helps people slow down, understand the risks, and make decisions with a clearer head. It also calls on sellers and platforms and content creators to operate with a little bit more honesty and fairness and responsibility, which I personally don't think is a huge ask. And so at its core, Rip Responsibly it's very simple. Enjoy the hobby, have fun, rip packs, collect what you love. Just do it with intention, not impulse.
And I like the idea of the collect with intention aspect of what you're doing. I think that is really important because, we've talked a lot about breaking because that's maybe one of the obvious parts of the hobby where there's a lot of, energy and excitement and swipe quickly and all that kind of thing. But I mean, it can accumulating too much and without exact purpose or reason is something that a lot of collectors go through. And it's something that can be a little bit challenging to, even that to navigate. Like, I mean, it's a progression that I think a lot of people go through. Even as I look around my office that I'm sitting in today, I got some boxes of cards and cards stacked up over here on my desk. It's a little much, like it's a little too much, from some boxes that I ripped and everything like that. I've gotten much more intentional over the last few years about my collecting and, going after specific things that I know are going to be things that kind of fit my collecting profile and that I'm going to enjoy holding on to for the long term, not just buying the newest, shiniest, coolest card because it just hit the auction block and I've got some FOMO. Like, I've worked on dialing some of that down by myself, and it definitely leaves you in a healthier long-term state to stay as a long-term participant in the hobby if you do have intention with how you're approaching building your collection. And so, and honestly, it may lead to a better financial result for you as well. Not necessarily, because some people are, I have a big Tim Tebow collection. That is not really, what I would suggest anyone do from a financial outcome standpoint. Right. But I collect with intention around my Tim Tebow collection because that has personal meaning to me. And it's a player who I just enjoy collecting, but I'm intentional. And then I collect with intention around cards of a memorabilia that I do think is going to have a lot of value in the long term. Like, for example, behind me here, the 1986 Fleer set. That's collecting this with intention because I really see that as a long-term asset, to be able to hold on to that. But I think having that intention to what you're doing makes for a healthier collecting experience.
Yeah, really well said. And I couldn't agree more. I think when you distill your collection down, when you curate it and you start to remove some of the things that you realize you just don't need or you don't want or you don't pay attention to, it allows you to appreciate what you do have so much more. And I've learned that through experience where, I used to be a big sneaker collector in my 20s. I'm 36 years old now. It's been some time since I was heavily involved in that community. But at one point during my compulsive spending days, I had over 500 pairs of sneakers, like stacked to the ceiling. You could see some of what's left behind me. And, I distilled that collection down over the years, and it allows me to appreciate what I do have so much more. And the same thing applies to the cards and the memorabilia and everything else that I've, been in love with in terms of collecting throughout my life. And so, it's really important for people just to be intentional, but also realize that by being intentional, you have to also be smart and responsible, because you could tell yourself I'm collecting with intention and end up, saying I'm only going to buy 5 cards, but those 5 cards are out of your of how much they cost.
Right.
And that could, lead to sort of confusion and, issues down the road. So, it's not a one size fits all, but it's certainly something that we want to drive more awareness around, so that people aren't just completely losing themselves chasing hit after hit, case hit after case hit, one of one after one of one in every single new release.
Yeah.
Right. I do have to ask you, because you brought up Tim Tebow, and I know the Prism Draft Picks football is a recently new product.
Yes.
Did you pick up the Tim Tebow manga?
No, but somebody actually opened up a box of Prism Draft Picks in our store and pulled that card.
No way.
So I'm jealous.
Beautiful
that the box was sitting here inside our store with that card in it, and they got it and not me.
Yeah.
That's a super cool card. I will buy one of those.
It's expensive. Like,
well, and so, again, collecting with intention and being, methodical and patient about what you're doing. I know, and I say it all the time on my show, that when a new set comes out, the first sales of any card are typically going to be the most expensive. And then over time, you'll see the prices come down. So I will buy that card, but I also will wait 3 or 4 or 6 months to buy that card on the secondary market, because I know prices are going to be a little bit lower than they are today, with the people trying to buy the very first copy of it because they have a little bit of FOMO, right? So I'm going to be patient. I'm going to wait.
good.
And then I know I will buy the card. I will add it to my collection, but I'll do it with a lot of intention.
Love to hear it. All right, Geoff, we're going to close this out with our rapid fire reflection round. I'm going to ask you 7 questions. You're going to hit me with your first thought, honest thought. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. One misconception about breaking you wish would disappear.
One misconception about breaking I wish would disappear is that all breakers are crazy. There's a lot of breakers of different styles and shapes. And right. I think we've got some really great ones at CardsHQ that are totally chill. And it's not all about taking your shirt off and acting crazy. There's plenty of great breakers out there.
Breakers come in all different shapes, sizes, personalities. So it's a good answer. The most dangerous tactic currently normalized in the hobby.
The most dangerous tactic currently normalized in the hobby is it's a good one. I should have studied this list beforehand. Probably you're getting true reaction on this type of thing. I would say it would be, to be honest with you, I think there's a lot of ways you could go with this answer, but I would say it's dealers pricing cards way over comps, and then unfamiliar collectors buying those cards without negotiating, without realizing what a bad deal they're getting. Like, I feel like that happened. There's a lot of card shops and dealers at card shows whose showcases are full of cards that are double or triple the last sale price, and they're really not priced fairly. And yet they're expecting negotiation, but they get some people who don't negotiate because they don't know any better. And then the dealers have just really, kind of taken advantage of the unfamiliar collector. So I wish that I don't love, and that does happen.
Yeah, it does. One guardrail you'd implement across the breaking ecosystem tomorrow, if you could.
I'd say, going back to some of our earlier conversations, I would probably say, reducing, I would probably eliminate, the 3 second, 5 second sudden death auctions. And I think I would just in general reduce high pressure sales tactics as best you could as a platform. Certainly the breakers can make decisions to reduce that and not have their team do it. And just make the whole thing a little more chill and give people, don't put quite as much pressure on folks. So I think that's the better approach to take. So that's what I would change.
Yeah, great answer. A platform with the most power to create positive change.
I think content creators are very powerful. I think what you're doing will be more and more powerful as more and more people listen to you and get exposed to what you're doing. Certainly getting, the manufacturers or the live streaming platforms to incorporate some of this thinking into how they're architecting their products or their platforms or their own content would be really helpful as well. But I think getting content creators to talk about it and to build awareness of it, may end up being the most powerful.
Which you kind of already answered this question just now, but how can leaders with platforms like yours help push this movement forward?
Having conversations with people like you, talking about these topics, which aren't always fun or comfortable topics to talk about, especially for those in the business, right? Hey, we would make more money if we employed high pressure sales techniques and ran 3 second sudden death on all of our stuff, right? But there's balance. And I think that people need to, as you said, like think about what's good for the long term of the hobby and what's good for collector health. And there's a balancing act. And so I think that's what people just have to certainly bring into play.
I've got two more for you. A hobby trend that excites you and a hobby trend that worries you heading into 2026.
A hobby trend that excites me is, I would say, the advances in technology and convenience that we're seeing for collectors. I mean, I think that, apps are evolving. Certainly we're doing a lot here at Sports Card Investor with like Market Movers. We're about to launch some really cool new revisions to Market Movers, probably going to launch in January, that I think are really going to make the experience of using Market Movers a lot easier and just a really great experience for everybody who uses the product. So we're really excited about that. And I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of interesting things with apps and websites and technology in the space. That's really great. So I'm excited to see that continue. And then worrisome, I would say just in general, 2025 has been a really hot year, for cards, especially TCG and Pokemon. And they're definitely, that kind of flipping mentality, fear of missing out that we've talked about a little bit during the show. There's definitely been some of that this year. And I think that, everybody wins if the market grows in a stable, healthy manner. Like stable, healthy, long-term growth is good. FOMO-driven spikes in the market are followed by big downwards drops.
Right.
That's not healthy. We saw that during the pandemic. We had a huge spike in the market followed by a big drop. And it's not quite as extreme right now, but I do worry a little bit, especially when I look at the Pokemon market, that you had some real spikes this year and you're already starting to see a little bit of a drop. And so that just generally worries me. Like I prefer to see slower but steady growth rather than like big spikes and big drops.
Yeah, I think with Pokemon, the 30th year anniversary is in 2026.
It
right?
is, so it's probably going to be another
reflection
hot year. Yeah. We're going to see, I think you're going to see Pokemon cards probably be really, really hot this next year, which I think is great. But I think it's great if it's growing in kind of more of a healthy, long-term sustainable way rather than kind of a flipper driven, culture that's bolstering everything up.
Yeah. Did you see that Joe Burrow clip of him talking about Pokemon cards?
I did.
That's great. Yeah. Awesome. In one sentence, where do you think the hobby truly stands today?
I think I would say overall it is in a healthy spot with a lot of future growth, but it does have some warts and wrinkles that it would be nice to smooth out. So I'm still very optimistic about where the hobby is. I think that there's a lot of wonderful hobby experiences that people have and a lot of new collectors getting into it that genuinely love the hobby. And we see it every day in CardsHQ, people walking in, a lot of people for the first time who are very, very excited and genuinely love coming to our trade nights and, buying cards and buying boxes and meeting other collectors. And they just love the spirit of the whole thing. So I think there's a lot of health right now overall, but I do think there are some wrinkles and some warts that we talked about during this show today, things that certainly could, be improved and get a little bit better to make that long-term collecting experience more healthy and sustainable for all.
Absolutely. And we're hopeful that as we continue to spread awareness, educate folks, get the word out there that we exist, that we're doing these sort of things together, the Rip Responsibly campaign, we can help propel the hobby into a future that's healthy, safer, and sustainable. So, Geoff, thank you, not just for joining the conversation today, but for stepping into a space that at times can be uncomfortable. It's nuanced, it's often misunderstood, and your willingness to engage publicly sends a message. Reform isn't anti-hobby. Responsibility isn't anti-fun. And transparency isn't a threat. It's a foundation. To everyone listening, Rip Responsibly isn't a slogan. It's a commitment to building a hobby culture where trust isn't optional and where collectors feel protected and where no one's excitement is taken advantage of. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by breaking, burned by a purchase, or pressured into decisions that didn't feel like your own, you're not alone. And that's exactly why Collectors MD exists. We host free weekly peer support meetings every Wednesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, and a Thursday meeting as well from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern in partnership with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado, called Unboxed, powered by Collectors MD. All tools, resources, and support offerings can be found at collectorsmd.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Collector's Compass on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all major streaming platforms. And check out our other shows, Behind the Breaks and Collectors MD Features. Geoff, thank you again. I'm Alyx Efron. This is the Collector's Compass, reminding you to collect with intention, not compulsion. We'll see you next time.